This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch for Monday, February 23rd, with Reid Collins in Washington, Mary Ann Laughlin and Patrick Greenlaw in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. It was a joyous homecoming for the Soviet dissident Yosef Begun today. Friends and supporters were waiting for him and his family at a Moscow train station. They gave Begun a hero's welcome, hoisting him on their shoulders. Begun had served 3 years of a 7-year sentence at a prison east of Moscow, charged with anti-Soviet agitation. Friday, he was pardoned by the Supreme Soviet. Begun said he was insanely happy, his praise for it, and vowed to help the other prisoners of Zion win their freedom too. He ultimately hopes to emigrate with his family to Israel. Well, the French war on terrorism scored a major victory over the weekend. 4 suspected leaders of the leftist group known as Direct Action arrested at a farmhouse near Orléans. French authorities say they found a stockpile of arms, explosives, money, and what they called incriminating documents too. Direct Action's been implicated in about 80 attacks since its founding in 1970s. The group also believed to be linked to other terrorist groups across Europe. In Paris today, very heavy security with the special French court beginning its first trial, this one against the accused terrorist Georges Abdallah. CNN's Richard Blystone reports despite all the security, there still appears Abdallah's allies may retaliate with more bombings.
For 10 days, the terrorists brought the Middle East to Paris. The wave of random bombing.
There they are. Takes your phone calls next on Take Two, right after the news.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Hello, I'm Ralph Wenge. Noon in the east now, 9 in the west. Take Two coming up in just a few minutes. For our top story this hour, we go to Lynn Brown in our bureau in New York. And Lynn, snow apparently has just crippled much of the Northeast today.
It certainly has, but it's changing. The snow has slowed to an almost imperceptible flurry in New York City now, with several inches of heavy, wet snow mucked up the rush hour this morning and left Central Park with a beautiful, silent coat. The fast-moving storm dumped deeper snow on other parts of the Atlantic coast, from Kentucky to north of New York. More than a foot fell on Washington, D.C. early today, forcing the federal government to shut down. The storm knocked out power to more than 10,000 Washington area customers. Schools closed in the Maryland and Virginia suburbs, as well as in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and parts of New Jersey.
A survivor of the Treblinka death camp has identified former Ohio auto worker John Demjanjuk as the sadistic Nazi guard known as Ivan the Terrible. That's him sitting over there, Pinchas Epstein testified, pointing at Demjanjuk. Some spectators in the crowded Jerusalem courtroom applauded. In highly emotional, sometimes sob-choked testimony, Epstein went on to recount his memories of Ivan the Terrible.
Ivan was never satisfied. He would prey upon his victims every day, every minute, so that I cannot even compare him to an animal, to a beast. He was never satisfied.
Demjanjuk is accused of being one of 2 guards who turned on the gas chamber engines to kill more than 850,000 Jews at Treblinka in Nazi-occupied Poland. If convicted, he could receive the death penalty. Demjanjuk says he is the victim of mistaken identity. Thousands of armed police stood guard in Paris today as the first trial of France's Special Terrorist Court began. The accused terrorist, Georges Abdallah, described himself as an Arab fighter. He made the comment in response to a question by the president of the court. Abdallah was then removed from the courtroom after he referred to American officials, civil parties in the case, as, quote, criminal Yankees. He's accused of directing the killings of American and Israeli diplomats in Paris. Jewish dissident Yosef Begun arrived back in Moscow today. He returned to Moscow's Kazan railway station to a boisterous welcome by friends and supporters. Begun vowed to continue his vocal support for human rights in the Soviet Union. And he says he has refused to sign a statement agreeing to end his human rights activities. He was just released from the Soviet prison where he was serving a sentence for anti-Soviet activities. His release had been delayed for refusing to abandon his dissident activities.
Missouri Representative Richard Gephardt is about to officially throw his hat in the ring for the Democratic presidential nomination. While others have been campaigning for months, Gephardt will be the first Democrat to formally announce his candidacy. Gephardt says his campaign will center largely on trade issues. A published report says CIA Director-designate Robert Gates had a hand in passing on to the White House a 1985 CIA memo advocating arms sales to Iran. The report appearing in today's New York Times says the memo was signed by now retired CIA Director William Casey. Intelligence sources told the Times the memo led to the first National Security Council session for planning dealings with Iranian leaders.
High school students are using drugs and smoking marijuana less than they used to, but the deadly form of cocaine known as crack has become more widespread among the teenagers. An annual survey of high school seniors finds that over half the students had tried marijuana, about 10% less than the peak year of 1979. But crack smoking has increased since last year, and it's not just limited to major urban areas either. The survey also showed that cigarette smoking remains high. Almost a third of the more than 15,000 students questioned said they light up occasionally. And still another survey, this one by economists, predicts prices to rise a little bit this year and that economic growth will stay just about the same. The poll of 250 business economists conducted last month found more optimism about the economy than 3 months ago. Most of the economists questioned say they don't see another recession coming for at least 2 years. And the percentage of economists predicting a downturn this year has dropped sharply since the last survey.
The Supreme Court today agreed to rule next term on the issue of the death penalty for minors. 19-year-old convicted murderer William Wayne Thompson of Oklahoma has argued that imposing the death penalty on minors is cruel and unusual punishment. Thompson was 15 when the crime occurred, 16 when he came to trial. 14 of the 37 states with the death penalty exclude youths under 18, 17, or 16. One state, Indiana, permits execution of children as young as 10. Ralph?
Well, NASA workers have begun closing up a pair of abandoned missile silos and underground equipment rooms at Cape Canaveral. Sealed inside, most of the wreckage recovered from the Space Shuttle Challenger. The Challenger blew up January 28, 1986, killing all 7 crew members on board. That's a look at some of the top stories of this hour. We'll have more a little bit later. Now, take 2, and for the first time in more than a week, it's Dave and Lois.
We are back indeed, Ralph. Thank you, and welcome to this Monday edition of Take 2. I'm Dave Walker.
And I'm Lois Hart, and later today on Take 2, actor Don Amici talking about his new TV movie about 2 Army buddies who come across a lot of money.
First in the program, as we have just heard, in less than an hour, Missouri Congressman Richard Gephardt announcing that he will become a Democratic candidate for president in 1988.
Gephardt admits he's an unknown in national politics, so what are his chances in a White House race? And how is the 88 campaign shaping up generally?
And joining us with some answers to these and other questions is Martin Schram, Associate Editor of the Chicago Sun-Times. Schram has an upcoming book, The Great American Video Game, Presidential Politics in the Television Age.
And Frederick Allen is with us here in Atlanta. He is a political columnist with the Atlanta Journal and Constitution. Thanks for coming in. Richard Gephardt, I guess his main claim to fame would be the tax reform that he helped get underway in this country.
Yeah, that presupposes that he has any claim to fame at all. I mean, this is not a household name. This is the first of the Democratic announced candidates who are from that second echelon that no one has ever heard of. And now he begins the terrible, punishing, arduous process of trying to get somewhere beyond 1 or 2% name recognition with the people, which is not easy to do.
But being a dark horse is not necessarily a bad thing.
Well, actually, it's been a curiosity to me. I assumed that when the Reagan administration bumped into as much trouble as it has in the last 3 months over the Iran-Contra affair, that this would have the effect of speeding up the presidential sweepstakes for the next time. People would be saying, essentially, well, that's that for Reagan. He's all through. Who's next? But it hasn't really happened that way. I've been surprised. In a way, I guess everybody's been preoccupied with watching the dissolution of the administration and maybe just a little bit put off because here's yet another presidency that seems to be unraveling. But I get the sense that people really aren't looking ahead to 88 as much as I thought they would, and they're not paying as much attention to the next crew of people who would like to be president.
Well, before we get into perhaps what they are paying attention to, let me ask Martin Schram. Gephardt is from your neck of the woods, so to speak. Is he fairly well known out there?
If he's well known, it's by people who think his first name is Bradley, as in Bradley Gephardt. That's the tax reform bill, and if anyone's heard of him, that's all they've heard. Dick Gephardt is unknown. He comes across on television kind of like white bread with the crust cut off. And if he's going to be making a real go of it, he's going to have to develop some kind of public personality. I'm not talking about public policy. He's good on policies. He's got a lot of those. But he's going to have to come up with some kind of public personality. Fortunately, this race is no different than any other race. Nobody really pays attention except for a handful of reporters and a couple of TV interviewers at this time. So he's got time to try it all out and road test it in living rooms in front of 10 people having a cup of coffee in Old Danish. And by the time he gets around to the real thing, he'll be okay, I would guess, along about maybe a month before the first votes are counted in Iowa.
Well, you're writing a book about television and politicking and all of that. Are there any Democratic candidates out there that have that charismatic television appeal that is necessary, apparently, to win it all these days?
Well, at this time in 1983, of course, the one guy we knew didn't have it was Gary Hart. He was an asterisk in the polls, and he was boring people on the stump. But then when people really start paying attention, Gary Hart somehow turned it on just a little bit every time he got in front of a camera, and he did well in Iowa, did very well in New Hampshire, did well in the Super Tuesday states down in Florida, and came very close even in Georgia, and that's the making of a candidate. Hart has it, and no one else does now, but then again, it doesn't matter.
Mr. Allen, would you agree that of the Democratic contenders, Gary Hart does have the lead in this telegenic personality department?
No, I think Marty made some very good points, but I think perhaps Hart actually started to go down a little bit when the main scrutiny did arrive. I mean, here's a man who broke through with a lot of personal campaigning in Iowa, and then in New Hampshire, I don't know how much the voters of New Hampshire got to know him through television, but certainly in the South, he was a meteoric explosion who didn't really live up to it. I mean, one of the great ironies to me is that Gary Hart actually peaked too soon in the Georgia primary. He had gone from totally unknown. In the space of 2 weeks, he was leading in the polls in Georgia for our primary. And in the last week before the primary, he actually dipped down and lost the state narrowly to Mondale. That is almost defies any rational analysis of something happening that way. A man totally unknown 1 week, prepared to win the state of Georgia 2 weeks after that, and then actually peaking too soon and falling down. But no, I don't think he has that kind of glandular effect on
If anybody did, I think it would be Mario Cuomo, and I'm sure that all the Democratic candidates are glad that he's out of it. Where do you see him throwing his weight?
Oh, I think having got out of it, he'll sit back for a long time now. I don't see, there wasn't really much purpose for him to get in there and try to help anybody now. I expect that probably down the road he would certainly help the Democratic nominee. He might even indeed be on the ticket if certain things were to happen and that magic came through. But no, I don't think he'd get active in it now.
Martin Schram, let me toss out an old name here, Ted Kennedy. He's being mentioned again as maybe he's not out of it. What do you think?
Well, I haven't heard Ted Kennedy say anything to that effect. No, I think Ted Kennedy is not going to be a candidate until he changes his mind, as he's been wont to do time after time. But I think he's not going to run. But I will say this: if you take a look at if you go back and look at television throughout the New Hampshire '84, Georgia, and Florida, you'll see that what happens on TV news, which is really what the people running TV news let happen, is really what determines to a very large extent the rise and fall of candidates. And sure, Gary Hart rose when everyone was suddenly discovering him. Then when they started to take a look at his change of name and all that jazz, he started to slip a bit in the last days. And then finally he did himself in and cost himself the nomination in Illinois when he undid his whole message with a series of gaffes that was just unbelievable.
Are we selling voters perhaps a little bit short here? In other words, do you think that they are perhaps a bit more sophisticated about the machinations of TV and how candidates use it to come across?
No, you see, people are trying to take the measure of the candidates. And very few of them are going out and meeting these candidates and talking with them, not even in New Hampshire, as a matter of fact, truth be told. They get their measure of the candidates through television. They look at him, they see how he performs, he or she, and they make their judgment. And sometimes it's up and sometimes it's down. But that's how they get to know the candidates and make their decisions.
Mr. Schram, stay right there, and Frederick Allen, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more of our discussion.
We have always been proud of our son, not just because he's so famous, but because he cares so much about people, from young kids to all of us older folks over 65 and on Medicare. Lots of us are real worried about Medicare, because even though it still helps, they keep raising the parts we have to pay ourselves. You could end up paying thousands of dollars in hospital bills out of your own pocket. But thanks to our son, Muhammad Ali, we're not as worried about those hospital bills anymore, because he made sure we have Security 65, the Medicare supplement insurance plan that guarantees to help pay all the bills that Medicare won't.
It's true. Muhammad Ali personally picked Security 65 to protect his parents, and you should too. You see, Medicare makes you pay $520 for just the first day in the hospital. But with Security 65, you won't pay 1 penny. Or after 60 days, Medicare makes you pay $130 a day. But with Security 65, you won't pay 1 penny. Even after 3 months, when you'd pay $260 a day, Security 65 pays it all. So call this toll-free number for free information about this affordable plan from Continental American Life. Just like Muhammad Ali, do it for your parents. Or if you're over 65, do it for yourself.
You better believe, Ali, you need more than just Medicare.
He's the greatest.
For free information about the Security 65 plan for people over 65 and on Medicare, call this toll-free number now, 1-800-346-6000. You'll get your free Security 65 information kit with no obligation. Call now, 1-800-346-6000. This is a free call, 1-800-346-6000.
Now back to Take Two on CNN.
We're back. We're talking about presidential politics, looking a bit ahead, maybe to 1988, with Martin Schram, Associate Editor, Chicago Sun-Times, and Frederick Allen. He is the political columnist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Frederick, let me get your thoughts on who out there, besides Mr. Gephardt, looks interesting to you. Jesse Jackson, has he got a shot at it?
No, absolutely none at all. He's looks as though he were fully intending to get back into it again. Why, I've never been entirely sure.
What is his
limited.
He wants to be a player?
That's something that Burt Lance spent an entire year trying to figure out. A lot of people in the party would go to Jesse and say, what is it exactly that you want? Because, beyond just the generic desire to be a player in Democratic Party politics, to be consulted, to be paid respect, to be the voice of black America, which presumably is what interests him. But what kind of deals did he want? What did he want out of it for himself? And he never would say. And I think he hasn't said to this day.
I think it's pretty clear what Jesse Jackson wants, Frederick, at least the way I see it. Jesse Jackson wants to be a player, a voice, a spokesman, a leader. And if you get out early and cut a deal early, you've gained some early leverage, but then the Klieg lights are off and they're on some other guys, and television people aren't around you. Every time there's a debate that's held, if Jesse Jackson's there, he'll do fine. He does well in debates. And Jesse Jackson wants to be there and be in the spotlight right up to the end. I think he thinks that that's the best way to be a leader.
But Marty, to what purpose exactly, other than just the general idea that he wants to be respected and dealt with? What kind of deal does he want? What does he want, for example, to have some input naming a running mate? Does he want to be Secretary of State? Does he want to be Secretary of Housing and Urban Development? What deal does he want? He's never really been able to say it.
I think the main purpose has to do with a very fine and grand ego. But beyond that, there's a time to cut that deal for vice presidential leverage and Secretary of State and all that other stuff. And that's after the nominating process has worked its way. And if he's still a player right up to the end, then he's got leverage. If he makes his deal in 1987, February of 87, he's got no limelight, no spotlight, and no deal.
Mr. Schram, any of the other names that are being talked about interest you at all? Dukakis, Nunn, Lobb, Biden, Babbitt? Any of those going to be around in another year?
Well, I think a lot of them will, and maybe even some of them who've taken themselves out now. Sam Nunn is so able. I was surprised that he took himself out. I'm not the expert in it, but Frederick certainly is. Do you think he's out to stay?
Well, I think he doesn't want to be out to stay. He got out. I think he was being reasonably sincere. He's got a big committee to run, Armed Services, and he's on the Iran Select Committee.
He can get a lot of TV coverage there.
Well, he can get that. I mean, I think part of his reason is that whenever you have not taken yourself out, you're suspect. Everything you do is the way Teddy Kennedy was often treated. Every time he said or did anything was assumed to have a presidential motive. But I think Nunn is reasonably sincere that these are time-consuming duties that he has, and that if he were to form an exploratory committee now and start into that hard process of raising money all the time, spending every waking hour on the phone raising money or making a flight to Iowa or New Hampshire, he would not be able to do his job, and that would become obvious soon enough. And I think he wants to do that job. I think part of this is sincere, and I think part of it's pure politics, that he will probably look better 6 months from now if he's not running than if he is.
Let me ask you guys what you think about the idea, and it seems to have faded away in recent years, but maybe it'll come back, the Democratic Convention in Atlanta. Is there a possibility for a wide-open convention, second, third ballot nominee, this sort of stuff?
I don't see it. I don't see how you're ever again going to have a brokered convention, simply because there's so many delegates who are selected through the primary process. By March 8th, 1988, when you have finished the Super Tuesday primaries in the South, you will have selected a third of the delegates right then and there. And and then by the time you finish all the states, I think it's highly unlikely that you could have an open convention.
Well, good. We get to disagree about something then. I think it's possible. I do indeed. I think that Jesse Jackson can be a force, can't win, but can be a force and a player. I can see one candidate winning a couple of early contests, someone else doing strongly but not overwhelmingly, capturing all of the southern primary, regional primary, if you will. And I can see it going down to the wire with no one quite being able to get over that majority mark, in which case Atlanta gets to be a lot of fun.
I hope so, just for the sake of excitement. It would be good to see. Before we let you go, Mr. Schram, they're at it again in Chicago, aren't they? I read one headline that says other cities have elections, Chicago has brawls.
That's right. That's right.
Is this the end of the machine in politics if Washington wins?
And if it is, how will we know? No, it's not the end of it's not the end of the machine in politics. As long as there's a Chicago, there'll be a machine. There may be two machines, but there'll at least be one.
Let me ask you, Frederick, one parting shot here with the report coming out on the Iran Gate, or whatever you want to call it these days. What effect, if it's as serious and damning as a lot of people say it's going to be, are we talking about the end of the Reagan presidency, in other words, almost?
Well, let me give you an outside the Beltway, non-Washington view of it, which means I'm just observing this like most American citizens. But it seems to me that when the First Lady and the White House Chief of Staff are said to be not speaking to each other, hanging up the phone on each other, you've got a White House in considerable disarray. I think also that anyone who's spent any time around politics knows that when a chief executive gets up and says, my top aide is free to go whenever he wants, that's an unmistakable signal that time has indeed arrived. If Regan doesn't go soon, it will surprise me, and particularly if, as we've been led to believe, the Tower Commission report is as damaging as they say, I think he has to go, and I think Reagan's in deep trouble.
All right. Frederick Allen and Martin Schram, thanks for joining us today. We're out of time. We'll do this again maybe in the near future. Thanks for being here. And just ahead, Brooks Spiceland checks out the weather.
And a program that fights teen pregnancy by working with unwed fathers. A report on that next on Take Two.
Does your investment money work as hard as you do? With your responsibilities, can you afford lazy money? At McLaughlin Piven, we advise our clients nationwide on fixed income investments. Call McLaughlin Piven, the income specialists, for our free investment newsletter on 1987.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Now a full
full 60 minutes of foreign news and perspective. This is the CNN International Hour.
Hebrew teacher and activist Yosef Dagon promises freedom for all prisoners of Zion, his vow as he returns to Moscow after 3 years in prison. And Syrian troops patrol the streets of Muslim West Beirut, their presence possibly setting the stage for releasing foreign hostages. Good afternoon and welcome to the International Hour. In Washington, I'm Bernard Shaw.
And in Atlanta, I'm Ralph Wenge. France is bracing for new terrorist attacks as a Lebanese extremist is tried in Paris. George Abdallah, who calls himself an Arab warrior, is accused of complicity in the murders of American and Israeli diplomats. CNN's Richard Blystone is following the trial.
A heavily armed motorcade brought Abdallah to the Palace of Justice to face French and American accusers. Security vigilance with 3,500 police on alert here has been heightened since the weekend arrest of 4 leaders of Action Direct, a terrorist organization with reported links to Abdallah's Lebanese armed revolutionary faction. The 4 were taken at a farm outside Orléans, along with a store of arms, explosives, radios, and money. The capture leaves only one of Action Direct's most wanted on the loose, but he's a bomb expert considered the most dangerous. Half a dozen security checks separated Abdallah's courtroom from the street. Arriving for the trial, Mrs. Charles Ray, whose U.S. military attaché husband was gunned down in Paris 5 years ago. Abdallah is accused of complicity in his murder, and the U.S. pressed for civil party status in the trial after reports that France might free Abdallah in a deal.
Mrs. Ray is in front of the court today because it has to be clear. It's not only the trial between George Ibrahim Abdallah and the American government. There were people who were shot in this case.
The 7 judges are trying Abdallah under a new law passed after jurors in a previous terror trial received death threats. Asked his occupation, Abdallah answered, Arab warrior. He made a long statement challenging the court's jurisdiction and denouncing Yankee executioners in Lebanon, then walked out. Abdallah's lawyer, Jacques Vergès, failed in his effort to call ex-premier Laurent Fabius and other ex-ministers as defense witnesses. He claims the former government welched on a pledge to free Abdallah in exchange for a French hostage in Lebanon. Bombers demanding Abdallah's release killed 11 people and maimed dozens in a Paris bombing wave last September. Having made his speech, George Abdallah is back behind bars and not expected to take part further. The 7 magistrates will carry on, guarded night and day throughout the trial and probably long after. Richard Blystone, CNN, Paris.
Syrian troops who are trying to keep the peace in West Beirut came under attack themselves today, but for many in Beirut, the Syrians' arrival brings hope the days of bloody factional fighting are over. As the dominant power in Lebanon, Syria yesterday deployed 7,000 troops to halt the battles between rival militias. The Syrians also surrounded the airport south of the city. But today the Syrians were attacked as they patrolled a neighborhood controlled by the Druze. Syria rushed in reinforcements to put down the attack. Police say 4 civilians were killed in the crossfire. Iran claims its forces have pushed closer to Iraq's second largest city, Basra. Iran says its forces killed or wounded 2,500 Iraqis in overnight fighting. Basra is the target of Iran's latest offensive in the Gulf War. And for its part, Iraq says Iranian shelling of Basra violates an agreement to suspend the attacks on civilian targets.
A West German politician said today he is convinced the United States intended to kill Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi during last April's bombing attack. Dieter Schinzel's comments were in reaction to a report in the Sunday New York Times magazine which said the primary goal of the air raid was to kill Gaddafi and his family. Gaddafi reportedly escaped unharmed, but his 15-month-old adopted daughter was killed and his wife and several of their children were wounded. Schinzel, who visited Tripoli 2 months after the attack, told reporters all the evidence indicated that Gaddafi was meant to be killed. U.S. officials say the report is false. White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan is undergoing increasing pressure to resign. The president's top advisor has been criticized by both supporters and critics of the Reagan administration since the Iran-Contra affair was first exposed. First Lady Nancy Reagan reportedly is no longer on speaking terms with Reagan and is pressuring her husband to get rid of his right-hand man. Some sources close to the president say that he is ready, though reluctant, to let Reagan go.
When asked about Reagan yesterday, President Reagan said he's waiting for the Tower Commission report, but some lawmakers are calling for him to act now.
Mr. President, come out and lead us. Start anew by immediately dismissing your Chief of Staff, Donald Regan, the only person today who makes Bob Haldeman look good. Get rid of this deadly disease called Iran-Contragate by taking immediate action. Don't wait for the Tower Commission.
White House spokesmen say Reagan is at his job today and they know of no plans for him to resign. The man President Reagan wants to be the next director of the CIA, Robert Gates, reportedly helped pass a 1985 agency memo calling for American allies to sell arms to Iran. The New York Times reports today the memo suggested the arms sales would create Western leverage with Iranian leaders and would counter Soviet influence with Tehran. The memo was written by a senior CIA analyst who worked under Gates.
Soviet dissident Joseph Begun got a hero's welcome in Moscow today. The Jewish activist was reunited with his family and friends after spending more than 3 years in a Soviet prison. CNN's Peter Arnett reports from Moscow.
Joseph Begun has come home to Moscow to a joyous welcome from his friends. The longtime political activist, freed from prison last Friday, told well-wishers waiting for him at the train station that he's in good health and grateful to be free.
To be with my friends, to be with my family, to do everything from success, Jewish culture in this country.
Begun was escorted to Moscow by his wife Ina and son Boris, who had traveled to Chistopol prison to pick him up. Begun had been sentenced in 1983 to 7 years imprisonment for teaching Hebrew, an illegal act in the Soviet Union. Begun's release came after protesters staged 5 days of demonstrations in downtown Moscow. Plainclothes police violently dispersed the protesters in the Western press covering the events. Begun went straight to his Moscow apartment after his arrival. He joyously hugged his waiting mother. He says that he will continue to work for Jewish culture and maybe teach Hebrew again. Begun was still wearing his prison jacket. His wife Ina bubbled with enthusiasm over her husband's return.
I'm so happy. And my feelings so high.
Begun's phone soon started ringing with congratulatory calls from around the world. For the Begun family, the release of Joseph Begun is part of a continuing struggle with Soviet authorities. Their main desire is to immigrate to Israel, a battle they've been waging for 17 years now. Peter Arnett, CNN, Moscow.
Later this hour, we'll be talking with a former Soviet diplomat who is now living in this country, Vladimir Sakharov, and we'll be talking and trying to get a better perspective on some of the more recent dissidents. We usually hear about Russians who want to come to this country, but today a different kind of a story. 182 former Soviet citizens left New York last night on an Aeroflot flight bound for Moscow. Many of the Russians have become American citizens during the years they lived in the United States, but for one reason or another, they simply couldn't adjust to life in the United States. Friends and relatives were at JFK Airport to see them all.
All the freedom I can use, I've been here for 10 years, and work and enjoy and go, whatever I want. They can't use it because they don't speak the language, and they can't afford it financially. And now is a chance to go back, and I think they're just as happy because they've been here with their kids for 10 years, and now they're going to have a good time.
Good luck, my mama and papa. God bless you. God help you.
The Soviets arrived back home in Moscow today.
Here's a quick check of the national headlines at this hour. Missouri Congressman Richard Gephardt today became the first Democrat to declare himself a candidate in the 1988 presidential race. Gephardt told a crowd in St. Louis that his background as a son of a milkman will help America untap its vast potential. The Supreme Court has agreed to decide whether states may execute juveniles who've been convicted of murder. The justices say they will hear the appeal of Oklahoma death row inmate William Wayne Thompson, who was convicted for his role in a murder when he was 18. A late winter storm dumped up to 20 inches of snow from Kentucky to New York today. This snow virtually shut down the federal government here in Washington.
And still to come in this hour of international news, emotional testimony from the survivor of the Treblinka death camp, the trial of the man accused of running the gas chambers. And when we return, what this weekend's currency agreement means to the world economy. Many of the financial markets are jittery today because of it, including Wall Street. The Dow has been down more than 20 points for much of the day. The details coming up.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Missouri Democrat Richard Gephardt wanting to follow in the footsteps of another famous Missourian, Harry S. Truman. Today, the six-term congressman threw his hat into the ring for the Democratic nomination. Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Newsday. In Washington, I'm Bernard Shaw.
And in Atlanta, I'm Don Miller.
And I'm Bella Shaw. A suspected Lebanese guerrilla leader went on trial today in Paris on charges of directing the killings of 2 American and Israeli diplomats. Security was tight as the trial began for Georges Abdallah. He is accused in the 2 killings which occurred 5 years ago in Paris. He also is accused of being involved in the attempted murder of the U.S. Consul General in Strasbourg, France in 1984. Abdallah spoke for about 10 minutes today at the start of the trial. He defended the action of Arab fighters and denounced what he called American imperialism in Lebanon.
Syrian troops took to the streets of Beirut today as part of their peacekeeping duties. The troops were greeted by shoppers as the city came to life after a week of bloody battles between the Shia Amal and Druze militias. There were scattered outbreaks today by some militia forces who remained in the streets despite orders by the Syrian army to return to their homes. The 7,000-man Syrian force returned to the city to halt the week-long battles that killed some 200 people. The troops were sent by Syrian President Assad at the request of Lebanon's Muslim leaders.
White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater says President Reagan has not asked White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan to resign. This despite reports the president has bowed to pressures from his wife and aides and is ready to let Regan go. Democratic Congressman Bill Richardson of New Mexico says he can hardly wait.
How can the president deal with the Soviets if he cannot settle a dispute between his wife and the Chief of Staff?
Chief of Staff Regan was at the White House today. Some sources say he'll soon leave after the Tower Commission report is released Thursday. White House officials are now conceding they expect the Commission's report to be full of bad news. The panel has spent 3 months reviewing the Security Council's operations in the Iran-Contra affair. Its report will be long, perhaps more than 1 volume, and hundreds of pages. One senior administration official says, quote, hard hits, I'm sure there are. Bad news, I'm sure there is.
Soviet dissident Yosef Begun returned home to Moscow from a Russian prison today to a hero's welcome at a railroad station. Begun tossed roses into the crowd as he was carried on the shoulders of friends after he emerged from the train. He served more than 3 years in prison for Jewish immigration activities and for opposing restrictions on teaching Hebrew. Begun had recently taken part in a 2-week hunger strike to protest what he called the inhuman conditions of prison. He told reporters he still has several goals.
To be with my family, to do everything from success, Jewish culture in this country, rights to study our language, to be Jews in real way, and to have right to go to Israel.
Begun said he still wants to immigrate to Israel, but he said Soviet authorities had made no promises. His release came after 5 days of street demonstrations last week that attracted world attention.
182 Russians returned to their homeland today after living in the United States for several years. The former Soviet citizens arrived in Moscow on an Aeroflot jetliner from New York. Many had become U.S. citizens during their time in this country. They gave various reasons for returning to the Soviet Union, although most said they simply couldn't adjust to life in the United States. Relatives were at the Kennedy Airport in New York yesterday to see them off, including the grandson and daughter of one elderly couple who had lived in the U.S. for 10 years.
All the freedom that I can use, I've been here for 10 years and work and enjoy and go, whatever I want. They can't use it because they don't speak the language, and they can't afford it financially. And now is a chance to go back, and I think they're just as happy because they've been here with their kids for 10 years and now they're going to have a good time.
Good luck.
my mama and papa. God bless you. God help you. That's it.
It's not clear if those who return will lose their American citizenship or if they will ever be allowed to return to the United States.
Israeli Prime Minister Shamir says American Jews should come home to Israel. Shamir says Israel is not just for Israelis, it is for all Jews. And he says the state of Israel needs their energy and money. Shamir made the appeal at the Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies in Los Angeles. It was the first time an Israeli Prime Minister has made such an appeal.
A survivor of the Treblinka death camp took the witness stand in a Jerusalem courtroom today and identified John Demyanyuk as Ivan the Terrible, a sadistic guard who tortured inmates before gassing them. Pinchas Epstein testified he'd never forget Demyanyuk's face, although it had been 40 years since he'd seen him. Demyanyuk claims he was never at Treblinka. If convicted, he could be hanged.
The Supreme Court revealed a list of cases they would and would not consider next term. The justice agreed to decide if it is unconstitutional to sentence minors to death. The High Court will hear arguments in an appeal by William Wayne Thompson of Oklahoma. Thompson is on death row for participating in the murder of a man. He was 15 years old at the time. The justices refused to decide, at least for now, on a Minnesota law that requires a girl under 18 to get permission from at least one parent and wait 48 hours before obtaining an abortion. That law was held unconstitutional by a federal district court and is currently being reviewed by a federal appeals court. The Supreme Court will hear arguments next term on a Virginia law that bars bookstores from displaying books that could be considered harmful to children. That law is an amendment to a statute that attempts to shield minors from sexually explicit material, but it goes further, banning displays of any books that could be considered harmful. The justices decided not to hear an Illinois case brought by a woman who was fined for failing to wear her seatbelt. The court affirmed the Illinois State Supreme Court ruling that the law was constitutional and did not violate the defendant's right to privacy. President Reagan met with the nation's governors today, and he told them he likes much of their welfare reform proposal. The governors are in the nation's capital for their annual winter meeting. The president told the group he agreed with the low-cost elements of the proposal, and he said he applauded the emphasis they put on self-responsibility.
Goal is to establish a process that allows states and communities to implement their own anti-poverty ideas based on their own unique experiences. States and communities are in the best position to find solutions to welfare dependency. In fact, a number of you already have used the limited independence that you now have to improve your welfare systems.
The $1 billion initial price tag on the governor's proposal was not directly discussed. The governors and President Reagan did not agree on how much of the program the federal government should fund.
The first hat was thrown in the ring today for the 1988 Democratic presidential nomination, and it bore the name of Missouri Congressman Richard Gephardt. He announced his candidacy today before a flag-waving hometown crowd. The rally was held at a renovated railroad station just a few blocks from where his late father ran a milk route in South St. Louis.
Today, surrounded by my family and friends, and not far from where I grew up, and on the site where Harry Truman accepted victory, I am announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
As many as a half dozen other Democrats are expected to seek the Democratic Party's nomination.
Chicago bookmakers are apparently doing a lively business on tomorrow's mayoral primary there. Local bookies are certain Mayor Harold Washington will defeat former Mayor Jane Byrne. They're said to be offering 8-to-5 odds in his favor. Washington